Hello, and again, welcome back to the Ambassadors of Gaming. I'm Ambassador Michael. We have an interesting treat for you today. However, I would like to again introduce one of my new associates. If you had seen the other day, we recently introduced our good friend Daryl has decided to bless us with his review skills, and we will be putting up his reviews and impressions in video format on the Ambassadors channel. We've also added some more people to the team, and we'll continue to announce that as they make their debuts. We have decided to kind of go with a Smash Brothers reveal for all of our friends here. So our next introductee, our newest representative, our newest ambassador in training, if you will, is a good childhood friend of mine. His name is Adam Smith. And Adam is a long time old school gamer. He is a fan of the old school RPGs, Final Fantasy VII. He enjoys Pokemon, and he is an avid Resident Evil fan. As you can tell, his tastes vary widely from Chris and I's, and so that's why we have decided to add him to the team as well. So for Adam's debut, I thought it would be interesting for him to just speak on something that he felt very strongly about. And so we decided together to have him do his video on why he believes Resident Evil 4 is a huge misstep for the series. So, thank you again for being a patron. We appreciate your support. We hope that you are happy with the content we have made here for you today. And we thank you for your patience. This was a long time in the making. It did take roughly about 2 weeks for us to research and kind of get Adam situated. He's new to all of this, so it's not as simple as writing the script, and turning on a camera and getting it done in an hour. It took us time to get things sorted and situated and for him to get ready. This was his first attempt, and I think he really nailed it out of the park. But let us know what you think in the comments. And thank you again for your patronage. On with the show.
Resident Evil 4. Some say it was the best. Some have very fond memories of playing it. For some, it was the entry into the series, put on multiple systems across many years. Well, today, I am here to tell you why Resident Evil 4 was the worst. Why was Resident Evil 4 the worst? Well, for starters, they started competing with games like Call of Duty and other games that were at the top of the chart in the world at the time. Instead of just trying to stick within their survival horror genre, instead of realizing that they were the kings of that genre, they controlled the survival horror genre. They were at the top of the charts in that genre. Instead of realizing this and accepting it, they decided that they had to start competing with every other game genre out there. They wanted to sell more copies of Resident Evil than they were selling copies of Call of Duty. So Capcom was like, how can we do that? How can we outsell Call of Duty? They still call it a survival horror game. And is it still a game that's goal is to scare you? Yeah, it's still trying to scare you, and it's still like a scary game, but I do not consider it survival horror, because to me, survival horror is you get a set amount of resources, you're not getting more of those, you gotta survive in this world with the limited amount of resources you have, and there's a chance in Resident Evil 4 that when you kill enemies, they will spawn gold or items like bullets or health pickups or something, right? And so the fact that when I kill something I might be rewarded for killing it, that makes it less survival horror for me, because survival horror doesn't give, it takes. They decided to, instead of being survival horror, they changed it into more of an action shooter game. It was all about the action and the first person shooter perspective of it. That's just a common evolution of a game series like this. I'm not saying anything bad about that. I'm just saying it was less of a survival horror and more of an action shooter. They thought that going in this direction, going in this genre change, even though they will not admit it, they will still to this day say Resident Evil 4 is survival horror, which I disagree with. But the reason for this change of genre was to try and sell more Resident Evil, try and make more people want to play Resident Evil. And this change of genre was a mistake. Now, for me to prove that this change of genre was a mistake, I'm going to use their most recent games to back that statement up. Now, Resident Evil 7, that was survival horror. That was scary. I still haven't even beaten the game because I get so, I have panic attacks when I play it. Mostly because I play it in VR, but, this is a scary game, man. And no argument there. Is that survival horror or not? No argument for me there. That's definitely survival horror. And they've remade Resident Evil 2, and they stuck more with the roots of the series. And honestly, Resident Evil 2 was very successful and well received, and that is definitely survival horror too. No, they should have kept the games more like 7 and 2 is, and not have went with the direction that 4 brought into 5 and 6. Capcom thought that the series was in decline, that Resident Evil was failing, that people weren't interested in it anymore. So they thought that the series was in desperate need for change, and their answer to that desperate need of change wasn't slight, subtle, small changes. It was to bring a complete overhaul to the series. Now, this complete overhaul they did to the series made it almost unrecognizable to some and completely unrecognizable to others. Now, I'm saying, if I released this game and I didn't call it Resident Evil and I didn't call Leon Leon, you wouldn't have figured out it was a Resident Evil game. You would have been like, this is a cool game, this is fun, and then someone would have been like, yeah, it's a continuation of Resident Evil, and you'd been like, what? No way. And you'd be like, oh shit, it is? Whoa. So, the complete overhaul that they brought, they didn't have to go so extreme with it. They didn't realize it, but within this complete overhaul, they took the series away from survival horror and brought it into action shooters. They made it less of Resident Evil and more of Call of Duty. Going back to the Call of Duty sales. You could have sold Resident Evil 4 as a completely different game series, and honestly, I think it would have been more successful. Which, ironically, is funny, because when they first started developing Resident Evil 4, it turned into Devil May Cry. A quote from the producer of Resident Evil 4, I'm gonna butcher his name probably, Hiroyuki Koyabashi. His quote is, Resident Evil has always been about the story more than anything, which is one reason why we can take it in a more action-oriented direction. Now, I don't know if they realized how stupid what they just said there was, but let me tell you how I'm understanding this quote, so you can see from my perspective how stupid this sounds. But my understanding of this quote is, Resident Evil has always been about the story, which is why we can make it all about the action. How does that make sense? The series has been all about the story, so we're just throwing that all away, and now it's all about the action. Action, 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 action. Who cares about the story? What? How are you gonna build up your series on story? It's all about the story, this intricate spider web of Umbrella, and then now it's just no story, just action. You gotta focus on the action over the story now? Resident Evil 4 had nothing to do with Resident Evil. It had 3 Resident Evil characters in it. That's all it had to do with the other Resident Evil games. Just 3 Resident Evil characters. It barely even mentions other games. When the game starts off, it talks, Leon goes over Raccoon City real quick, and then just, it's 6 years later, and Umbrella's already fallen. How? What happened with that? They were going somewhere with a storyline into them trying to bring Umbrella down, and now we just skip 6 years later, it's already brought down? So it had nothing to do with Resident Evil. There was no Umbrella, there was no T-Virus, it was a parasite. It was still kind of the same, recipe, scientist working in a lab on something that creates zombie-like things, bioweapons and all this, it's the same thing over again, but just completely different now. So, it is Resident Evil, but it has nothing to do with Resident Evil, if you know what I mean. The only things in common with the other Resident Evil games and with the rest of the Resident Evil story were the characters of Leon, Ada, and Wesker. And Ada and Wesker were barely even in the game. Actually, I'm pretty sure Wesker wasn't even in the main game. I think Wesker might have just been in, like, the Ada missions after you beat the game. I could be wrong about that. No, I think he was in the actual game. But Leon, Ada, and Wesker are barely in the game. And they're the only things that connect it to the rest of the series. They don't really even bring up the rest of the series or really talk about it. The original storyline, which I'll get more into later. Now, when I say original storyline, I do not mean the storyline that got turned into Devil May Cry. I mean the storyline they made following that one. People like to refer to it as the Fog version, I read. I'll talk more about that later, but I'm not talking about the storyline that turned into Devil May Cry. But the original storyline took place 4 months later. Instead, what we got was a storyline that took place 6 years later. And so, they went from doing it from 4 months, this is just afterwards, bringing down to 6 years later. A huge time jump. They were going on with a storyline, and they just dropped the storyline, jumped ahead, and, there was no dots connecting this to any of the other games. And, that would have been fine. There are game series out there like that, but Resident Evil was a game series known for all of the games having little tiny dots that linked them all up to each other. Even the offshoot games like Resident Evil Survivor, you still could tell it was Resident Evil. It's still Umbrella and stuff. There's still the viruses. You could still draw the spider web and connect everything. You could not do that with 4. There was no spider web to connect everything. They had to bring the connections in 5 and wrap up the new storyline they created in 6. There was no connections. They had to draw out the connections in other games, which I think's a fail. Your game should show the connections within itself. You shouldn't have to make more games to show the connections. And there were no zombies in this Resident Evil, which isn't that's not a complaint for me. I'm okay with the fact that there was no zombies. But that's just to show how much different it was than the normal Resident Evil. Now, the reason for there not being any zombies was Dawn of the Dead. The new Dawn of the Dead movies started coming out. 28 Days Later came out. They introduced what people called the super zombies, the more aggressive, more savage, faster zombies. These zombies weren't shambling down the hall towards you to slowly lunge at you and take a bite. These zombies were screaming and hissing and snarling and just running like a cheetah at you, and you're like, oh shit. Like, those were the zombies that these movies started giving out to us. And Capcom was like, well, our zombies aren't scary anymore. People want these fast, scary zombies. So their solution was, for Resident Evil 4, no zombies. Instead of being zombies, they are people controlled by parasites, which is still technically a zombie, but just a different kind. Originally, in the Fog version, it had a storyline on the Progenitor virus. And instead of getting that storyline, the Progenitor virus is what they made the T-virus from, Umbrella. And instead of getting that storyline in 4, instead of expanding upon what is Umbrella, instead they took it away from us and then made it the main thing of Resident Evil 5. So they took stuff away from this game just to put in future games. And it's kind of like the same thing a lot of people feel for movies. Like, your game, your movie should be somewhat standalone-ish, Doesn't have to be completely standalone. You can always expand it. You can hint at future games and stuff, but you shouldn't be removing content from your game or from your movie just to use it later down the line in something else. They had to make side games to explain the downfall of Umbrella. Because, Resident Evil, the first game they went in, you learned about Umbrella. Then Resident Evil 2, Raccoon City underwent a viral infection. the city succumbed to zombies and you had to escape the city. Resident Evil 3 took us back into the city with more of what was going on in the city, and actually showed us that the U.S. government was working with Umbrella. The city got nuked. It was all covered up. So we're sitting there at the end of Resident Evil 3. Umbrella seems like they're getting away with it because they're working with the U.S. government and they've covered up the whole Raccoon City incident. And then if you want to go on into Code Veronica, you find out Chris went into Europe to find the main headquarters and try and find evidence to bring down Umbrella. And then Claire went to go after him. She got caught. Code Veronica happens, right? And basically at the end of Code Veronica, it's still gung-ho, we need to stop Umbrella, we need to bring down Umbrella. And they were just setting up for the storyline to go into, here's them stopping Umbrella now. But instead of going into that storyline, it was just 6 years later, Umbrella's gone, it's been brought down, now it's bioterrorism in the world because of the viruses and shit went on the black market. It started up this storyline on the downfall of Umbrella and just didn't deliver it. They had to make side games to deliver that. Not only did they have to make side games to deliver it, but there is a movie. So they had to make side games to explain the downfall of Umbrella. They made Resident Evil Revelations, Resident Evil Revelations 2, Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, Resident Evil Darkside Chronicles. You know, they started making all these games that no one really asked for, no one really wanted them, but they had to make these side games to explain, like, what happened to Umbrella? Why isn't it around anymore? How did they prove that Umbrella was involved? You know, what happened? Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside Chronicles, you learn more about every character in the series, and you learn more about Umbrella, and they even put hidden secret Umbrella files hidden in the game for you to even learn even more information on the inner workings of the company. And Resident Evil Revelations explained what happened for the other characters besides Leon in between the original games and then, you know, 5 and 6. You know, what about these other characters? What were they doing while Leon was doing this? They made games for those, which that's acceptable. They probably could have done, they're going to do that either way. If I want to be frank about that one, though. They made Resident Evil Degeneration, and within this movie, they explained the downfall of Umbrella, how they brought it down. It ended up popping up that Umbrella was involved, and there was a whole lawsuit and stuff, and Umbrella was brought down and put to justice. But the U.S. government tried to keep their hands clean from it still. They kind of known that the U.S. government was involved, but they still wanted to deny it. You know, no. We no sell viruses here. But this movie, Resident Evil Degeneration, explains the downfall of Umbrella, and there's a new company that rises up out of the ground, Will Pharma. You know, then it turns out that this pharma medical company is doing the same thing Umbrella was doing, and they're brought down almost instantly because people are like, oh no, they're doing what Umbrella's doing, can't have that, shut them down, shut it down. And not only that, but getting away from Resident Evil 4 for a second just to explain, because Resident Evil 4 set up for the hatred and not well received games 5 and 6. You know, people didn't like those games, and what people need to realize is those games were the way they were because 4 was the way it was. But in 5, you find out Wesker has this company, Tricell, and he's basically used that to replace Umbrella, you know. And when you play 5, this comes in out of nowhere. It's just, here's Tricell, it's a company, it's a thing, you don't know anything about it, but here it is. And within this movie that finally gave us the downfall of Umbrella and this second company that rose and fell, within that second company falling is the creation of Tricell and this new company that takes place of the storyline and replaces it. Granted, it was only for one game before that company fell, but still, they connected all the dots for you, showed how everything lined up and what happened. They finally gave us closure to this storyline they started up like 8-10 years ago, the downfall of Umbrella. How did it happen? They finally gave us closure, not in Resident Evil 4, not in Resident Evil 5, not in Resident Evil 6, but in an animated movie that they made for the hell of it. Getting into some of the gameplay elements of Resident Evil 4 and kind of back into the genre side of things, but like 30 to 40% of Resident Evil 4 is like a tactical protector game. You got the president's daughter, Ashley, who can't do anything for herself. You gotta tell her to hide in the dumpster. You gotta tell her to go up the ladder and stuff. Wait, follow me, and she can't shoot. She can't defend herself. It's just, Leon, help! Leon, help! And she gets taken off the screen, you die. And it's the most annoying thing ever, and even people that love this game will tell you that it's annoying. But it's funny because people didn't really bitch about Ashley that much. They didn't really complain about Ashley that much. But then Resident Evil 5 comes out with Sheva, and everyone loses their mind over Sheva. Meanwhile, I'm sitting over here like, what's the point? At least she can shoot, unlike Ashley from the game you guys all love so much. But yeah, 30 to 40% of the game you're spent protecting Ashley. Survival horror is more like, I gotta look out for myself and make sure I can survive through this. But now I'm protecting her? No. That was unnecessary. That was not needed. I get it, they were trying to make like an upgraded version of the whole Sherry incident and stuff. It's kind of like how you found Sherry in Resident Evil 2. You protected her throughout that story. Yeah, but you didn't actually have to physically protect her throughout the game. This game's all like, no, you're actually going to physically protect this girl from 40% of the game. Ashley's character, Sheva had AI, and the sidekicks you get in 6, they had AI if you weren't playing with a friend. Resident Evil 4 didn't even give you the option to play with a friend. Ashley was always a computer character no matter what. But as far as AI goes, I wouldn't really say she had an AI because she didn't do anything herself really. She was just like a programmed character. The only thing she would do for herself is if you made her climb up the ladder and you tried looking up her skirt, she'd just be like, you pervert! Cover up and stuff, Otherwise, there was no actions she really did by herself except scream, Leon, help. Resident Evil 2 Day, thanks to Resident Evil 7, thanks to Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil is definitely alive and well. It is going strong right now. But for a while there, they were releasing games like the Operation Raccoon City and Operation Umbrella and, the Dark Side Chronicles. They're releasing all these bullshit side Resident Evil games that no one cared about, no one wanted, no one really bought and played them, and Capcom was starting to think Resident Evil was dead. But what they didn't realize is it wasn't really dead. Resident Evil, this series is like the zombies that inhabit it. Resident Evil was what I like to call an undead series. It was still going strong, it was still making money, but to be honest, when 4 happened, the series died. They killed the series with 4 and just poked it along with a dead stick into 5 and 6 and finally realized they've been dragging around this dead body, and they gave it CPR and created Resident Evil 7. So far this whole time I've just been dogging Resident Evil 4 and saying what I don't like about it and how I think they took the series in the wrong direction. I'm not saying Resident Evil 4 wasn't a good game, because it was a good game. It sold very well. People liked playing it. There was reasons for this. It was a fun game to play aside from protecting Ashley. But people enjoyed the game. It sold so well that they made this game on GameCube, PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4. They made it on Android. It's on Steam. They put it on the Wii. It's about to come out on the Switch. Like, obviously it's a good game, or this wouldn't be happening. But the story and the direction that they took the series in with this game is the worst. And that is what I've been trying to tell you guys this whole time with this video, is that this Resident Evil 4 is the worst game because this is where they messed up the direction of the series. This is why people don't like 5. This is why people don't like 6. This is why 5 and 6 are the way they are, and it is all because of 4. The story mistakes they made in Resident Evil 4, they had to sacrifice Resident Evil 5 to link it up with the series, and then they had to sacrifice Resident Evil 6 just to close that little section off. Now, to help back up what I've been telling you guys, I'm gonna go over what I call the original storyline, the Fog version, because, you know, the original storyline turned into Devil May Cry, and we're gonna have people out there all like, oh, duh, duh. But the Fog version, I'm gonna go over that version. I'm going to go over the original storyline that the Fog version had compared to the storyline that we got. Just to show you guys that I think this would have been the correct direction to take the series. They still could have changed the series up with the same camera, the same shooting mechanics. They could have changed up the enemies. You know, you could have kept the same enemies that 4 had. I'm just talking about the story here. If they would have kept the story more like this, it would have been a better direction. And they would have been able to make a better Resident Evil 5. They would have been able to make a better Resident Evil 6. You know, I can't even imagine the kind of Resident Evil series we would have gotten if they would have stuck with the Fog version storyline. But let me get into this. So the Fog version storyline, Resident Evil 4 took place 6 years after Leon escaped Raccoon City. 6 years after that is when Resident Evil 4 took place. The original, the Fog version storyline had the game taking place 4 months after Leon got out of Raccoon City. So that's like right after he got out of Raccoon City. This is what happens next. Instead of we just jumped to 6 years later and forgot about all the stuff that was going on. In this version of the story, I'm pretty sure in this version of the story, this information's I pulled from magazines. It's kind of hard to piece together the canceled storyline of something we never got. Take this with a grain of salt, but instead of Ashley being kidnapped by a terrorist organization, it was Sherry Birkin, the little girl from Resident Evil 2 that Leon and Claire found in Raccoon City. She was kidnapped by Albert Wesker, who is the STARS leader in the original game, and you find out is working for Umbrella. Well, you also find out he wants to go off on his own and stuff because he can sense that Umbrella's falling. This version had Wesker kidnap Sherry and withhold her somewhere within Central Europe, which is still where Resident Evil 4 took place in Europe. But it was Wesker taking Sherry, and more familiar, would have linked up better with the other games, would have given the same effect as kidnapping the president's daughter would have given. Except it would have been a connection. It would have been more Resident Evil. So the Fog version storyline, we saw Leon struggling to survive after infiltrating a castle-like Umbrella main headquarters. So this storyline was now about the fall of Umbrella. This is Leon going to Umbrella's main headquarters to bring it down. This is the end of Umbrella. And this is the story. That was the original plan for 4, to give us the story of the end of Umbrella. Instead, they decided to skip over that and just jump into the next section, the next chapter, which without fully closing out the first chapter of the Resident Evil saga. It all began with Umbrella, and they should have finished off the Umbrella storyline before moving ahead. But they panicked and just jumped ahead. The Fog version had Leon gets injected with the parasite, and he deals with that throughout the story. So he gets infected in Resident Evil 4. That was always a plan, Leon to be infected in Resident Evil 4. But originally, he was to be infected with the progenitor virus, which is the virus used to create the T-virus. So he wasn't infected with the T-virus, but with the thing that created the T-virus. And being infected with this was supposed to give him a hidden power within his left hand that you would begin to be introduced to and access throughout the story of the game. I don't know what that power was. I don't know what it was going to do. Maybe it was some kind of special melee move that let you kill the enemies. Who knows? And we never will know. But originally he was to be infected, and, you know, from a special power in his left hand, I would assume kind of changing throughout the game, like the viruses make you do. which would have been a totally better storyline if you ask me. You know, going into the heart of an Umbrella facility, finding out exactly what the company is, Leon getting infected with the virus that made the T-virus, learning about the virus that made the T-virus, how the T-virus was created, you know. We were going to learn all that in Resident Evil 4 originally, and they just skipped over it all, like they didn't even care anymore. Like, they just gave up on the series when they made Resident Evil 4, is what it felt like to me. That there was no Ashley throughout the game. There was no protecting Ashley. You know, I know I said that Sherry was kidnapped instead of Ashley, but you didn't go and get Sherry and have to protect her like that throughout this game. That was not a plan for this game. That there was no one you had to protect, which would have made it better. It would have been more focused on survival horror and less focused on this tactical action shooter protecting the president's daughter while you're trying to get out of here. You know, if they really wanted this game to still be survival horror, we shouldn't have had to protect the president's daughter like we did. I mean, you could have had us do that, but not for 40% of the game. Just a small section where we do that would have been fine, would have sufficed. I would have preferred her just to have been kidnapped for most of the game, and a big part of the game being me going to get her, instead of me getting her and protecting her. I would have preferred a storyline that had more to do with the series and Umbrella. I would have preferred getting an explanation of what happened to Umbrella. That was the direction they were moving the series into. And if they weren't gonna give us that explanation, they shouldn't have made Code Veronica. They shouldn't have made the games end in a way that it felt like we were about to get into let's go take down Umbrella. You know, Resident Evil 2 ended, let's go take down Umbrella. Resident Evil 3 ended, let's go take down Umbrella. Resident Evil Code Veronica ended, let's go take down Umbrella. And then Resident Evil 4 comes along, Umbrella's been taken down. What? How? I don't know. You know, I know maybe it's just me. I don't like Resident Evil 4, and that's not the popular opinion. A lot of people like this game, and a lot of people love this game. People consider it the best. It's the best Resident Evil. It's the best game in the series. That's why they've remade it so many times, because people like it. They say it's the best. But I have come here today. I have made my argument. I have explained myself. I have backed up what I am saying, and I am once again stating Resident Evil 4 is the worst.